The radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Tuesday, 12 p.m. East Coast time, so middle of the day here in Puerto Rico. We're now on the same time as the East Coast. It is very, very confusing. It changes all the time. I wish they just set a time and stick to it. I actually like whatever we had before Saturday, that is before Sunday. So when we were ahead of the East Coast by 1 hour, that was kind of cool, closer to Europe, easier for me. But now we're the same as East Coast. That's also convenient in another sense. But the changes are just bamboozling and wasteful of people's energy and effort. All right, let's jump right in. I thought a quick update from Iran was due given the news yesterday. So yesterday, the Iran's judicial head, I can't pronounce the name, anyway, has announced that the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, has pardoned more than something like 82, so it's not clear exactly what the number is, but more than 22,000 people who were arrested or in prison in Iran have been pardoned by the supreme leader. The article also mentions that there's a total of 82,656 prisoners, and those facing charges are being pardoned. But it's not clear, but 22 of them were arrested amid the demonstration. So this is a massive pardon of prisoners in Iran. 22,000 of them, or over 22,000, are from the demonstrations. That's good news for the families, good news for the people who were obviously arrested. Not clear what percentage of that, of the total arrests that is. Many more people were arrested, and indeed those accused of what they're calling violent or property crimes are not being pardoned. And we know that a significant number of those arrested during the demonstrations. But it just gives you a little bit of a scope as to how many people were actually arrested during the demonstrations over the hijab and just the general unrest in Iran. Over 22,000 pardoned. Who knows how many not pardoned? At least 530 people were killed during those demonstrations by the authorities. A number of them were executed on, quote, crimes, so-called crimes related to the demonstrations. Anyway, so we will see. There's been no confirmation yet of any of these prisoners actually being released. This is a sign, unfortunately, that the regime feels comfortable that they have quelled the protests for now. It also is an attempt, I think, by the regime, who faces massive problems, primarily economic problems at this point, to appease the population and try and make sure that the protests don't arise again or they don't take a different form. So it both is a expression of some confidence that at least these demonstrations have been quelled, but also maybe a sign of weakness in an attempt to appease as Iran faces massive problems of inflation, unemployment, shrinking economy, and in general economic malaise. They have strengthened their relationship with Russia as a consequence. They are now, I think, the president of Belarus is visiting Iran to try to strengthen the relationship there. So they're going to be significant strengthening of relationship with actors that are already sanctioned by the international, by the U.S. and the West. Through this, I think the deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, at least the reestablished, quote, diplomatic relationship, is also indicative. There was brokered by the Chinese, is also an indication of Iran's trying to find places where they can create some economic activity because they're struggling so much. And of course, it also is an illustration of the growing role of China as an alternative in this part of the world to the United States, at least with regard to an actor like Iran that has no relationship with the U.S. And this is, it's sad because China has every incentive to ultimately see the Iranian regime toppled, because they I think China benefits from a weakness of Islamism. On the other hand, I think China is sympathetic to any authoritarian regimes out there. A toppling of an authoritarian regime is a bad sign for China. So yes, tens of thousands are being pardoned in Iran, but Iran still faces major issues, and you're going to see lots of more protests in the months and years to come regarding both social issues, but also regarding significant economic issues. Okay, talk about protests and riots. Wow, have you seen what's going on in France? I mean, France has seen well over 1 million people out in the streets. We are likely the rest of this week to see over 1 million people out in the streets almost every day. The streets of Paris, this is millions of people, over 1 million people all over France. In Paris in particular, demonstrations are massive and have often turned into riots. I've seen videos of cars being smashed, fires being set. And all of this while there's massive trash piled up all over the streets of Paris because of strikes and generally the French economy being paralyzed by these strikes. Now, what has gotten the French so upset? Is it a requirement to wear hijab? Is it some new authoritarian dictate by the French government? What the hell is going on in France, and why are the French so upset? Well, they're French. So what they're really upset about, what really gets the French excited, well, no, it's not baguettes, Ike. I mean, let's not exaggerate. It's not the price of baguettes going up. What really makes them upset, even more than baguettes and croissants, what really makes the French upset is if you try to reduce the pension age, if you cut into their retirement age. Right now, the retirement age in France is 62. The French's mentality, the culture mentality is we slave away at work so that we can retire. And take vacation all of August, right? And go on strikes once in a while. But work for the French is a necessary evil. They do not view work as a place to, as a cultural phenomenon, as a place to exert oneself, as to really push oneself, to excel, and to ultimately gain pride and gain self-esteem from one's work. That is not part of kind of the French mentality. The French very much is an egalitarian society, and is kind of dedicated to working enough to survive. Don't show off too much. Don't excel too much. The only people who show off and excel are old wealth. We don't particularly like new wealth. And of course, we take off all of August, and we want to retire at 62. Well, Francois Macron, since he came in, has had some ambition to reform the labor market in France and to get a little bit of French more productive, increase the work ethic. And he succeeded in reducing unemployment. Unemployment when he came in was 9.7. It's closer to 7%, still very high. He's liberalized some of the ridiculously Byzantine, cumbersome socialist labor laws in France. So he has done that. He did that in his first term, and that was a huge success. And I think it explains why, to some extent, why the French economy is doing okay. It's not doing great, but it's doing okay. And now, given that the pension system in France is not sustainable, given the aging population of all of Europe, including the French, at retirement age of 62, we just bankrupt the country. He is proposing a law to raise the retirement age. Now, prepare yourself for the shock, from 62 to 64. And the French people are going apoplectic. Again, massive riots. Of course, it's also an opportunity for the nihilists to go out and smash things. But millions of people out in the streets. 66% of the French population is against this. Macron, to his credit, is completely committed to this, pushing it through. The parliament will vote on Thursday. There's no guarantee that they'll pass. He has a majority in the parliament between the center-right and his own party, but it is not a huge majority, and there's a lot of pressure on particular congressmen to vote against it, given the how unpopular this is. Again, massive demonstrations anyway. Now, I think it's going to pass because I think Macron is dedicated to this, and this is his legacy, and his legacy, to his credit. Again, this is, we're talking about France, so we're talking about moving the needle a tiny bit towards a little bit more economic freedom, tiny bit. And this really isn't about economic freedom. It's more about sustainability of the French budget and their ability to invest in, quote, green energy, and their ability to invest in their military. The French are dedicated to investing significantly in the military, given the war in Ukraine, and given that they realize that there's a real threat in the world. And the French have a relatively strong military in Europe today. They are active in places like Africa. They have a military industrial complex, if you will. They have a industry. They make planes. They're a player, and they want to increase military spending significantly. Anyway, France will, I think, by the end of the week, increase the retirement age from 62 to 64. The French will have to suck it up with an extra 2 years of work before they retire to their chalet and eat baguettes and croissants. Just a note that the retirement age throughout Europe is generally over 65. In Germany, it's 65 and 7 months. I don't know how they came up with that number. Sounds like a big compromise. In Italy, it is 67, which is a little bizarre. In Netherlands, it's rising to 67 next year. In Spain, it's going to reach 67 by 2027, so they have a gradual rise. So, France is clearly an outlier here. And look, what do the French value? The French value egalitarianism, equality. They don't trust profits. They don't trust capitalism. They don't trust economic freedom. They are deep at heart statists, whether of the socialist kind or of the more fascist kind. But they are dedicated to what they perceive as the good life, which means not working. And in that sense, Rousseau, the French philosopher, has had a deep influence on French society and on, they're just wanting to hang out and just, work is, and civilization generally is cumbersome. This is the state of France. Hopefully, by the time all of us tourists go to France to enjoy ourselves, the strikes will be over, although strikes seem to be spreading more internationally, not less. The strikes in England, strikes in France, strikes in a variety of places in Europe, even strikes in the US. So unions flexing their muscles, even as they decline, particularly in the US. All right. Okay, quick update on banks, because we've been talking about banks so much over the last few days. Bank stocks this morning, massive, big recovery. Some of the bank stocks that were down, 30% yesterday, up 60% today. So a big recovery. The big index for bank stocks is up 6%. So that is a measure of the industry generally. But basically what happened was the government didn't shut down any banks. So I think the markets took that as a signal that banks were not going to be shut down. The banks were unlikely to collapse. I think the real risk people really were worried about was the risk of shutdown, the risk of a bank run like Silicon Valley Bank and its Signature. We're not exactly sure what happened at Signature, but at least Silicon Valley Bank. And they were afraid of that would drive the feds or the regulators shut down more banks. That didn't happen last night. It didn't happen during the trading day, in spite of some banks being down 60% yesterday. Early in the morning, at least, they recovered somewhat later. But the outcome ultimately is that today bank stocks are way up. So it seems like there's some recovery. Just to give you again just a little bit more news on Silicon Valley Bank. All kinds of stuff is happening over there, but the feds are now. They've reopened the auction, so they obviously tried to sell the bank on Sunday. The bids were either insufficient or too many conditions or whatever. They didn't like any of the bids. So they're reopening the auction today. So there is or they reopened it yesterday. So there's a new auction to sell Silicon Valley Banks, the assets and so on. I still expect that to happen sometime this week, with the government guaranteeing some of the downside, but basically allowing one of these banks to take over the assets and take over the liabilities of most of the liabilities of the bank. Other things that are going on, I find this, everything is political today, everything. There's nothing that is not political in the world today. So yesterday, Governor Desantis placed the blame for the failure of Silicon Valley Bank on the fact that they emphasized DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, that they were too focused on being woke as to not run the bank. No understanding of the dynamics of a bank run, of this particular bank run, or what happened. I'm sure DEI played a tiny fraction of a role, but it wasn't the driver of what happened. I saw other comments from the right about DEI woke stuff being the cause of the banking of SVB, and a certain glee about the collapse of SVB. Again, I think this is both silly and, it's stupid. It might make political sense to play to the base, but if you're trying to get new voters, if you're trying to build up a voter base among independents and not just play to the people who are going to vote for you anyway, then I think this is a stupid strategy, because it doesn't address the real economic issues, and it doesn't address what's really going on, and of course it has a sneering, disregarding, aloof, and snobbish attitude towards all of Silicon Valley, and maybe they deserve it to some extent. But really, if you want to have a thriving U.S. economy, destroy Silicon Valley. That would be a great strategy for the U.S. economy to thrive in the future. Other parts of this, the left, of course, is jumping over the Silicon Valley Bank and saying, see, this is all the consequence of deregulation under Trump. Under Trump, actually, the CEO of Silicon Valley was in front of Congress arguing for this deregulation. It was a bipartisan bill, by the way, to deregulate less than $250 billion banks that are less than $250 billion, between 50 and 250 billion, which Silicon Valley Bank qualified. And therefore, it's deregulation that is at fault. It's the Trump administration that is at fault, even though, again, it was a bipartisan bill. See, this is what happened when we have cowboy capitalism. This is what we have when we have freedom. So both parties completely losing, have no clue what's going on here, completely don't understand what's happening. Both parties trying to use this for political leverage. The reality is, sadly, that I think the Democrats will have more traction with their story, because that is always the story, right? Everybody acknowledges that that's a story, Republicans and Democrats. Every financial crisis is a consequence of too much cowboy capitalism, and we need more regulation to stem it. Every financial crisis is a consequence of deregulation before they tell us, and everybody buys that story. That is a popular story. It's a story that's acceptable by most of the population. It's a story that sells among Republicans and Democrats, and therefore I think the left has more traction on this one than the right story about DEI, which is so nonsensical. And I don't think, Signature, we'll see what kind of story we get there. But Signature falls into the same story that the left has. I guess Bernie Frank was a board member of Signature, so maybe, another leftist bank, and therefore Republicans are happy that it collapsed. I don't know. Hard to tell how this. Anything to attack the left, even at the expense of the U.S. economy attitude, where that actually takes you, bigger than what I can handle. All right, just to let everybody know, Miroslav here is on the chat, is letting everybody know we do have a Discord channel for the Yaron Brook Show. I have to admit, I don't go on there because too many platforms. I have platform fatigue. But there's good conversation there among people who listen to the show. You can all go. The link is on the chat. So if you're listening right now live and you can access the chat, go to chat, and the link is right there. Miroslav has just posted it. So this is a Discord channel for the Yaron Brook Show, for people who listen to the Yaron Brook Show, and it should be fun and exciting. Let me just mention now, we have about 100 people, just over 100 people watching live. We do have a target for every one of these shows, $250. In the Super Chat, we've raised 100, so 150 short. So if everybody right now puts in a couple of bucks, we'll get there. If a bunch of you put in 5, then those who don't put in can continue. The people who put in 5 can get us there pretty quickly. So please consider doing that. You can do it as a Super Chat. You can do it as a link. And then finally, if you want to become a monthly supporter of the Yaron Brook Show, again, trade value for value. You get some value from the show. That's why you're listening, I assume. Then you can do so on Patreon, Subscribestar, or yaronbrookshow.com/support. This show is funded. It exists because of all of you who have chosen to help support the show so far. So, and again, this having a news briefing every single morning during the week is still at the experimental stage. We're still trying to decide whether this is makes sense or doesn't make sense, profitable, not profitable. So if you value it, show me. All right, let's go to the next story. Russian migrants. This is an interesting story. So as you might know, there is a massive crisis, still a massive crisis in Europe of migrants, not so much by land from the Middle East, but now by boat, actually from Africa. So most of the migrants are coming in from Central and from Sub-Saharan Africa, are traveling to Libya. Libya is basically an anarchy. There really is no government and there's no controls of Libya, and they're getting on dinky little boats and attempting to cross the Mediterranean and to get to the closest place possible, which tends to be Italy. Italy has seen an influx of about 20,000 people since the beginning of the year. This is up from about 6,000 last year during the same period. Excuse me. Whew. I'm going to have to sneeze at some point here, but it's almost there. All right, 20,000 people came in, so they basically get on boats and they travel, and a lot of people have died. Hundreds of people have died in the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean, even though it's like this sea, can be quite rough during the winter months, and some of these boats are ridiculously pathetic, and the number of people they cram onto them is just absurd. A lot of children have died. I mean, it's just the whole thing is just unbelievably sad. Just in this past weekend, 1,200 people reached the Italian shore. Anyway, the Italian government has come out yesterday and basically said that the dramatic increase is basically being caused by Russia. That is, it's being caused by the Wagner Group in the Wagner Group, which is a basically private military, a group, a mercenary. This is the group that has been fighting for 9 months now in Bakhmut. This is a rival to the Russian military itself. Anyway, the Wagner Group is known to have a significant presence in Africa. Part of the way it funds itself is by controlling many of those horrible mines in Africa that you've probably heard about, where children are working, where the conditions are awful, where people are dying, just horrible, almost slave conditions. Well, the Wagner Group is responsible for much of that. They have a significant presence in Libya, Mali, and Central African Republic. And supposedly, they are driving people out of those countries on purpose so as to create a migrant crisis in Western Europe as retribution for Western Europe's support of Ukraine. Hard to tell whether this is true or not, or whether this is just an excuse that the Italians are coming up with in order to try to garner NATO support. What they want to do is patrol the Mediterranean and try to send these boats back to Libya. But it is an interesting story, and it's certainly quite possible, and I wouldn't put it beyond the Russians to do that. And the Wagner Group, who are known to be unbelievably ruthless and controlled by this oligarch in Moscow. I wouldn't be shocked if this was the reality. Just an example of using human beings, using real human lives to make political gains or to make political points. Unbelievably ugly. But of course, the whole treatment of the whole dealing with immigrants, the whole dealing with refugees, the whole dealing with what's going on in the world in that sense is ridiculous and sad. But a lot of people are making a lot of money off of, trying to get desperate people, trying to give them hope, and trying to get them to, across, in this case, across the Mediterranean, in the U.S.'s case, across the desert, to, relative freedom and relative opportunity. All right, I thought that was an interesting story. All right, finally, there is a massive rush right now, a global rush, really, a global rush to discover and to mine a variety of different minerals. It turns out that the shift towards, a fossil fuel reduced world, I won't say free because that's an impossibility, so a fossil fuel reduced world, involves investing heavily in batteries. And batteries involve both lithium, but they involve many other minerals, but also solar panels, generally electronics, all of these high-tech solutions and all of these battery-induced solutions require, significant, massive, mineral use of minerals. Many of these minerals are in places like China, although there are vast deposits of minerals we know in places like Greenland, and of course there are minerals in Africa, in Central Africa, where the Wagner Group is invested heavily. This is going to require both discovery of more of these minerals, and then mining these minerals, which is not easy, and particularly given the environmentalists' constraints on mining. There have now been massive deposits of minerals discovered in places like Sweden. There's just been a massive lithium discovery in northern India, in the Kashmir area of northern India. There are massive quantities of all kinds of minerals in the United States, all over the United States. And there is a rush to go and find them and mine them. And indeed, the Inflation Reduction Act, what a name, basically has massive subsidies for battery production and cars, electric cars, but only if they use both minerals and parts that are made and mined in the United States. In other words, this is meant to accelerate the development of a battery and electric car industry in the United States. Now, God, central planners. Again, this is the kind of thing that both Republicans and Democrats love, particularly if their districts benefit from it, because factories open up there, or jobs, or mines, or whatever. But in a sense, what's interesting is going to be, is it's likely actually this bill that requires made in America is actually probably going to slow down the development of a battery industry in the United States. Because the reality is that it is much faster and quicker and easier to mine overseas than it is to mine in America. It's probably easier to build a mine in Sweden than it is to build a mine in the US. Mining is so heavily regulated, so heavily controlled. So much of the land in which these minerals exist is probably owned by the state. Remember, 75% of all the land west of the Mississippi is owned by federal, state, or local governments. Permits, environmental challenges, regulations, concerns. The United States is probably the slowest country in the world to mine anything. So by requiring all these raw materials come from the U.S., we're actually going to see a slowdown, I think, in the battery industry. I won't be surprised at all if you will see in the months, years to come, a backtracking from this bill where we at least can buy minerals from allies as more and more countries start developing mines, shipping lithium and other minerals, and forwarding around the world. And we will be restrained from importing them. This is, again, import restrictions because of these ridiculous subsidies that are only subsidizing made in America stuff. Of course, nobody is considering the, quote, environmental consequences of all this mining, of all this shipping, of all this transport, of building batteries, of disposing of batteries, of everything is involved in it, which is, massive. And probably objectively, if we had an objective measure of environmental concerns, I'm not sure we do, and I'm not sure there is one. I'm not sure it's possible. But effect of human health, maybe, much more damaging than burning more fossil fuel. But it just shows that this attempt to centrally plan is always going to result in negative consequences. And you could argue these are unintended, but that's too generous towards the people because by this point, everybody knows that central planning has negative consequences. And you can't call them unintended. They might not know the specific negative consequences, but they know they cause negative consequences. So they're not unintended anymore. So there's no such thing. It's giving them way too much off the hook to call them negative, unintended consequences. They're negative consequences. These bills, the chip bill, the Inflation Reduction Bill, anything where the government is trying to micromanage the economy, centrally plan, subsidize, pick winners and losers, and all the rest of it, it's a disaster for the U.S. economy. It puts us on the same footing as China and European economies that are centrally managed. It is destroying the flexibility and the ability of the American economy to adjust to changing conditions, which is the hallmark of this economy, because it is reducing our freedom, and it is now, for the first time with chips and with batteries, impacting those areas where innovation is key, and therefore freedom is key. The last places in the world you want governments to be subsidizing, government to be controlling, government to be picking winners and losers, government to be putting in restraints on importation or trade generally, are the innovative industries, because the innovative industries are the ones where we need freedom. We need freedom to fail. We need freedom to try new things. We need freedom to take risks. We need freedom to think out completely outside of the box, something completely new that the government would never understand and therefore never subsidize. We need that freedom to be able to move forward. If you really care about reducing CO2 and alternative energy, what you should be advocating for is complete freedom in those industries. No subsidies, no Buy American, so that they can innovate, so they can propose crazy ideas to solve problems. Try stuff, fail at stuff, do stuff, instead of trying to convince government bureaucrats that your idea is best. It's so stupid, but yet, again, there is no political party today in America advocating for economic liberty, even a little bit. All right, whew. Okay, got that out of my system. Ragnar of the Desert just put in $50. Thank you, Ragnar. That got us a lot closer to our goal, so just short $61 now. Stephen with $5, thank you. Gail, thank you. Theme Master, thank you. These have all used kind of the sticker feature. Catherine, thank you, to support the show. You can too. If we just get everybody doing a couple of dollars right now, we can easily make this. All right. Let's see. Let's go to our Super Chat questions. We got a bunch of $20 questions. So thank you to all the $20 contributors. Now we're just down to $41, so we're well on our way. Is there any merit to the claim that part of bank failures is due to diversity quotas in the boardroom? I don't think so. I see no reason to believe that. I don't think that Silicon Valley Bank was necessarily any more diverse than other banks, but I don't think this was a problem at the boardroom level. I think this was a calculated, if you will, risk that they took, mistake that they made 2 years ago when they bought long-dated, what do you call it, securities. Not anticipating inflation. Nobody anticipated inflation, if you remember, 2-3 years ago. Nobody anticipated it. So they bought long-dated, as a lot of banks bought long-dated, and therefore took a hit in the securities portfolio. But at the same time, what was unique about that's interesting. Some things happened to my. Let me refresh. Something happened to the Super Chat track. All right, let's start it up again. Okay, give me a second here while I start this up again. Wants me to sign into YouTube again. Click. Continue. All right, we're back. All right, cool. Whoops, and I put in the wrong. I put in 650 as the goal by accident for the new goal, so ignore that. It's 250 is the goal. We're $12 short of that. Anyway, I explained all the reasons it happened. And lots of banks did it, even banks that you would consider completely non-diverse. And then, of course, Silicon Valley Bank was unique because it had 93% of its deposits uninsured. It's unique because of its complete concentration in the venture community, and as venture capital, as startup firms started to draw more money out than came in, because of the slowdown in the venture. That has nothing to do with diversity in the board. So turning everything into a cultural phenomena. I'm against all these board diversity BS nonsense type of thing. But I'm also against overstating and making up stuff in order to make your opponent look bad, in order to score political cultural points. So no, I don't think SVB's failure had anything to do with the composition of its board. I don't think the board had any real say, and I don't think in a sense, the left's argument about deregulation makes more sense than this argument. Sorry. All right, Martin. There was a debate on price ceiling for food between the Swedish Finance Minister and the Left Party leader. The minister was opposed to it, but pathetic in her rhetoric. She should listen to your morality of capitalism talk. Yes. I mean, a lot of times people have kind of the right position on an economic issue, but they don't know how to defend it. They don't have to stand up for it. They don't really understand the issues involved. And as a consequence, they can't defend it and they lose on it. So, yes, we need people to gain a backbone in defending capitalism, defending markets, defending more freedom in the economic realm. And my talk on the morality of capitalism, I think, explains why people don't have that moral backbone. Because while they think capitalism is efficient and productive, they think it's an immoral, fundamentally immoral system. Like Adam says, if you get the government out of finance, your retirement age could be whatever you'd like it to be. Huh. Wow. What a thought. I mean, you get to choose when you retire. Even if we got rid of Social Security and we got rid of Medicare and we got rid of these state pension plans in all these Western European countries, then individuals would actually get to decide how much to save and then how much to withdraw and when to retire based on how responsible they were in the past from saving, and what their retirement would look like and how much money they would have. All of this would be determined by individuals. What a concept. Yeah, Adam, absolutely. I mean, that's what freedom looks like. It looks like where you have decisions over your own life. and you don't delegate those decisions, don't give those decisions away to a third party, i.e. the government. Daniel says, in the media world of charlatans like Tucker Carlson, I like that you consider Tucker Carlson a charlatan. It makes people that are earnestly seeking the truth all the more valuable. Thank you for all you do. I really appreciate it, Daniel. Thank you. We are in the business of seeking the truth here on the Yaron Brook Show. Jennifer says, why do you think people hate Walmart so much? They don't mind Meijer or Target. Is it because of Sam Walton himself? No, I don't think so. I think it's because Walmart has a history that is now embedded in American culture of its rise to success, which goes back, I think, to the 1980s and 1990s, where it really took off. And it really, got a lot of bad rap in those days for expanding and being successful. But the way that was phased was of taking business away from the mom and pop stores, of coming into small local communities. And if you remember, Walmart really specialized in going into, not into the cities, not into the big metropolitan areas, but going into smaller places, going into smaller communities, and increasing the standard of living and quality of life in those communities dramatically. But at the same time, the consequence was that some businesses went out of business. Other businesses went into business. The net was a huge benefit, but some people lost. But a lot was made of that. There were demonstrations. There was a lot in the press about it. It was a big deal. And people learned to hate Walmart. And I think that stuck. So even though today Walmart doesn't have the same, people don't view Walmart quite the same as destroying jobs because of Amazon. They don't view it as a monopoly to a large extent because of Amazon. That attitude that developed in the 80s and 90s around Walmart, I think, is stuck, and that's why it's still there. And, Target and the others have arisen during this period where it's been more competitive with Walmart itself, but also competition with Amazon and everything else. Target's success is really a product of the last 20 years. Before that, it was just it didn't have the same, it wasn't competing directly with Walmart, which it is today. Thomas, did you see DeSantis' comment about aiding Ukraine not being important to national interest? Yes. I mean, look, DeSantis is running for president. There's no question about that now. And DeSantis is trying to capture as much of Donald Trump's people, and trying to capture as much of the Republican base as possible. So what he believes really deep down, we don't know. We have no clue. Many people who know DeSantis have told me that deep down he is a kind of a Reagan conservative, much more dedicated to free markets. But that's no way he's governing, because he's trying to become president. And to become president, he has to be an anti-woke guy. And being anti-woke right now includes being anti-Ukraine and being pro-Russia, or at least presenting it as, because you don't want to come across as actually pro-Russia, so you present it as, that's on the other side of the world, there's no vital American interest associated with it. But that's a cop-out, we know that. We haven't seen DeSantis actually address the issue. We haven't seen him address Russian aggression. Is there a national security issue for the United States in allowing, in having a country like Russia aggress against another country with no consequences? If there should be some consequences, but not the consequences right now, what should they be? How bad should they be? DeSantis is the last person on earth who's actually going to an analysis like that, who's actually going to propose to you a plan of how to deal with Russia and how to deal with the situation in Russia and Ukraine. He will send out platitudes like, it's not the most important thing in our national defense. I've got other things to worry about. He's going to say things like, we should focus on China. Why is China more important than Russia? Russia has expressed a willingness to use force. China has not yet. Anyway, there's a lot to unpack there, and the reason to worry about China. But DeSantis, because this is where the Republicans are, will focus everything on China and won't discuss Ukraine. He'll just give us platitudes about Ukraine. That's where the Republican Party is. And you can blame all of this on the fact that Donald Trump won in 2016. And I will still stick to my guns that I think Donald Trump has done more damage to the country than any other president, partially because he's destroyed the Republican Party as a viable, as a real viable political party. JD says, the UK government is pushing a harsh refugee bill, which has attracted a lot of controversy. The discourse around migrants is pretty ugly. What should the government be doing in your view? Well, I mean, the government should be doing what I propose the U.S. government do in the context of what's going on right now. And that is that that they should have an employment-based, legal, extensive immigration policy. Now, the UK, I think, is in some ways better than the U.S. and has maybe as a percentage of population, maybe more migrants in the U.S. I don't know, but basically say, look, our standard for immigration is not humanitarian. It is not what do you call it? Asylum. Our standard for immigration is can you get a job in the UK? Can you get a job in the US? And if you come on any other basis, we're just going to turn you around and send you back home. Now, again, this is not my ideal, but this is what's political feasible today to do. But if before you come, you contact one of these employment agencies, and they can secure for you a job in the UK, then we will allow you to show up legally in the UK. And they should just open it up. Anybody who can secure a job, any job, and this is true in the United States, any job is welcome. And what will happen is this whole asylum thing will collapse, because instead of seeking asylum, most of these people who are not coming over in order to become welfare recipients, they're coming over because they want a better life for themselves and their kids, and they want to work. They will apply for jobs. It's a win-win for everybody. It's a win for the migrants because they're not coming illegally and they're not coming as welfare recipients. And it's a win for the UK economy because they get a whole bunch of new workers and immigrants to the country. So that's the way to solve this. Right now, a lot of them are in France and taking boats across the channel. In France, set up an employment office, set up an office that connects people with jobs, and if they can find a job, right? If they can actually find a job, and then give them legal passage to the UK. All right, Flirtatious. Hello, Yaron. Was there ever any plans for an objectivist insignia? What does that mean? I was trying to imagine what an objectivist flag would look like. Also, I sent an email about my last super chat for places to see in Puerto Rico for vacation. Yes, I'm sorry, I haven't gotten to that yet. I'll try to do it today. I think the insignia is an Atlas Shrugged, right? It's a dollar sign. But I don't know of anything more than that. So I think it's Atlas Shrugged, right? The book ends with the dollar sign. All right, Daniel, the left is predictably blaming Silicon Valley Bank on Trump's relaxation of stress test regulation. What say you? It's not clear that the stress test would have found anything. So even if, and because it's not clear that anybody was looking where the problem was, which is the level of uninsured deposits. There are plenty of banks that actually are doing stress tests that have a lot of uninsured deposits seem to be fine. This happened very quickly, and it happened because of a draining of deposits, because of the particular circumstances in which venture capital and startups were in. Thank you, Daniel. Jason, is your estimation that would have happened in the Trump deregulation had not passed? Yes, I think the same thing would have happened. Jeremy says, what do you think of the assertion that the Fed, by projecting low rates in future quarters, encouraged buying Treasuries, then raised rates quickly instead irresponsibly. Should banks have known better? Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely a problem, and the Fed should be blamed for that to a large extent. I think this is the problem of central planning. You can't get it right. It's hard to blame the Fed for getting it wrong. They got it wrong. Shocking. But it's inherent in their job to get it wrong. It's inherent in the job to cause these crises. And it hasn't ended. The rising interest rates are still going to have significant economic consequences on a variety of different industries in the United States. So, but yes, I mean, the confidence with which they held that interest rates would stay low into the future, and the very fact that we had 0% interest rates for so long was just irresponsible and wrong. I mean, there had to be another mechanism to solve the particular economic problems that the U.S. and the West was facing other than 0 to negative interest rates. That, just the existence of that, has created massive problems that are going to filter through the economy for years to come. And this SVB collapse is one of them. Daniel, what do you think about New York Times hiring David French as a columnist? I think good for the New York Times. David French is excellent on many things. He's more religious than I would like, but on many, many things he's excellent. I think it's New York Times hiring one more token conservative, but that's okay. You know, it's good to have a conservative voice at the New York Times. David French is more conservative in a positive way. He's more free market than most of the other Republicans at the New York Times. And he's solidly, and I give him a lot of credit for this, anti-Trump and anti the populism that Trump has brought into the Republican Party. So Daniel French is one of the better conservatives out there today, again, in spite of his religiosity. Michael says, will Israel become like Hungary? Is Netanyahu the next Orban? I don't think so. I don't think Israeli society is quite that accepting. You know, you can see the demonstrations, the real struggles within Israel right now over what Netanyahu is trying to do. I think Netanyahu would have a really, really hard time with this. I think a majority of Israelis don't want what he's trying to do. This is being guided primarily by his own legal problems. He wants to secure himself immunity, and I mean, look, Netanyahu wants to become the next Orban. At the end of the day, I don't think Israeli society will allow him to do that. Adam says, I saw Vivek on Vivek's Ramaswamy on CNN Sunday. He's a mixed bag, but I'd probably vote for him. However, I don't think he has a chance of getting nominated because of how racist and xenophobic the GOP base is. Yeah, I mean, I basically agree with that. I don't think he has a chance of winning, and partially because of the xenophobia, but also because where he's good, he's very good. Where he's good, he's not where the GOP base is on economics, on government spending, on on basically economic liberty. He's not where the base is. The base is for central planning and for screw tech. He is also a tech guy. He's a Silicon Valley guy, he's a biotech guy, and he realizes the value of it. So I think on economic liberty, he's not where the Republican base is, and therefore they will reject him. All right, everybody. Thank you again for the support. I just want to remind the people who are maybe first time or don't listen that often, live, because there are 113 people listening live to the show right now, which is on the high end for these morning shows. You can support the show, and if you're getting value from the show, I'd appreciate you showing your support. You can support the show both watching live through the Super Chat and everything, but I think more importantly and more significantly, you can support the show by going to yaronbrookshow.com/support and doing it through PayPal or using Patreon or Subscribestar or Locals or just Venmoing me or sending a PayPal. I know a number of people just sent Venmo and PayPal. And I really, really appreciate that. This show is made possible by the support of you guys, of the listeners, of the watchers. Without you, there is no show. So thank you for all of you. Thank you for all the supporters. Also, don't forget to like the show before you leave, please. We should have way over 100 people, 100 likes. So please like the show before you leave and consider supporting us on one of those platforms I mentioned. Thanks, everybody. I will see you all. Tonight. 8 p.m. East Coast time. Tonight, 8 p.m. East Coast time. Peter Schwartz will be talking about altruism politics. Is there systemic racism? Or why there's no systemic racism, according to Peter, and all this other stuff. So that we'll cover a lot of stuff. His book on the morality of need, altruism, in other words. We'll talk about that. But we'll take your questions, so you can take it any way you want if you want to hear what Peter's views are on different topics. All right, I will see you all tonight, and if not, tomorrow morning.